Hey guys, so today I have another one of my Patreon book recommendations, and I just wanted to start things off by saying thank you to everyone who supports my Patreon. It really does mean a lot to me that you are willing to support my channel, and um, I've been pretty busy lately, and I had made this video already months ago, but I wasn't happy with it. And I planned to remake it, but things got hectic with work, and also we moved. So as you can see, some of my books are still trying to set my shelves up in a particular way. And anyway, so that's why there was a gap, but putting up this video, and there will be a couple more coming up pretty closely to hopefully make up for the gap. So anyway, just wanted to say thank you first off. So anyway, to the video today. So today I'm going to be sharing a special book to me. First, I'm just going to tell you about the book, what it's about, read you a couple passages, and then I have a bit of a journey to take you on. So first off, what's the book? The book is The House of Breath by William Goyen. And this is a first edition copy. It was published in 1950. So this has made it quite a long ways. And a little bit of my background with the book. So William Goyen is a Texas writer. I first heard of him must have been 8 years ago. Since I moved to Texas, I just looked up Texas writers, and I think I saw William Goyen's name somewhere. I probably heard of House of Breath, and then I think I heard of his book, Had I 100 Mouths. And then around that time, maybe a couple years later, I can't remember exactly, one of my friends actually gifted me a copy of Had I 1,000 Breaths. And I skimmed some of the short stories in there, and I enjoyed them. And around that time, I got a copy of House of Breath, and it didn't strike me. I don't know what it was about it. Frankly, I think I was too young for it, because at the time I would have been 20, 21 maybe, I think. And I had read some good stuff by that point, but I honestly think it just was a little too much for me at that time. So I put it off, didn't touch William Goyen again, didn't look at his books again for 6 years or whatever, 7 years. And then one of my friends, Echo, you guys might know him from his YouTube channel, Echoes of Lost Libraries, pretty sure it is, yeah. He mentioned Goyen again to me, and that spurred me to read The House of Breath. And at that time, I just flew through it. I couldn't believe that I didn't get into it the first time. So basically, the story is there's not really a plot. It's one of those books that it's about the voice and the feeling it gives you and the anecdotes of it. It's not a traditional plot narrative. So the main character is part of this Ganshin family. Now, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but I imagine it's something like that. Ganchion. Ganshin is probably how I'd say it. And they are from a small town in Texas, East Texas, outside of Houston. And the story is told from the perspective of Boy Ganshin, kid who grew up in this small town around his family, and then presumably has left and has come back to his abandoned childhood home. And the way I think about it, and the way I've mentioned it to people, is like, imagine if Proust was from a small town in Texas and wrote a book that's less than 200 pages. I think it's less than 200 pages, right? Yeah, 170 something pages. So that doesn't sound a whole lot like Proust, but the reason I say that is to emphasize the emphasis of memory and nostalgia in the book, and things that are lost, and being in search of lost things that you can never really fully capture. So yeah, I think now talked a little bit about it. I'll just read a passage from the beginning of the book, and then I'll talk a little bit about Goyen. So this is in chapter 3. Yeah, chapter 3, so page 20, very, very early on in the book. And this will give you an idea of how the writing reads. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah. So he's talking about the kitchen of his house. Imagine he's going into his house and just walking around his house, and he's having these memories flashback. Here, tacked on this wall in the kitchen of the house you held, Charity, and Charity's the name of the town, was the world's body, showing all the life in it, and all the life was in Christy and me. And our skulls became lighted globes of the world that the map had stamped there, which each of us held in his hands, turning it round to find the worlds that each of us had given to the other. And I just love that idea of, and our skulls became lighted globes of the world, almost as if, it's the inside of a cathedral, and then the murals on the top of the cathedral are the globes, the lighted globes of the world, and the skull is the cathedral. I think he makes a metaphor like that at some point as well, early on. It's like the inside of a skull being the inside of a cathedral. But that passage allows me to highlight one thing that I really appreciate about this novel, is that although you might, initially think, oh, small town in Texas, presumably takes place in the 1920s, published in 1950, this must be some parochial, small scale story or perspective. But Goyen traveled a lot by this point, by the time he was writing this. So I'll get into his biography more after I talk about the book, but he did grow up in a small town in Texas, but then his father wanted him to go to Rice University in Houston, which, at the time was a very good university, as it is still today. And so he went to Rice, and then he ended up fighting in World War II in the Pacific Theater. And after that, he met some artists came back to New Mexico, met some artists, went over to Europe, traveled around Europe, and then by which point he had already started writing something. It's kind of how he talks about it in his letters. And that something, of course, ended up becoming House of Breath. So it doesn't have quite as small of a scale that you would imagine if you just heard the description of the novel. Oh, it's about a small town in Texas, published in 1950, takes place in the 1920s, So that is the first thing that I would say that really, really impressed me, Our skulls became lighted globes of the world. It really does have a universal perspective in this book. But while keeping that in mind, it does capture very well the feeling of a small town. And a little bit of my background, I was born in a small town in Illinois, and even by the time I was born, it was starting to dissipate, the liveliness of it. But especially now, I've traveled back, I still have some family that lives there, but it is, the town is falling. It had risen through the 50s through 70s, and then by the 80s it had plateaued, and then by the 90s it was already on a downward slide, and it's thoroughly on the downward slide now. And I kind of feel the same thing that Goyen must have felt when he went back to his small town, which was Trinity, Texas, was the real name. And then Charity is what he calls it in this. Yeah, it's this, and I'm sure everyone must feel this even in towns that aren't dying, so to say. But it is this feeling that there's something permanently lost that you can only really capture in your memory. But like I said, this universal perspective. So let me read you this next passage that I thought, really, really impressed me when I first read it. So let's see. So it touches back on this map. When Christy and I looked at the map and saw all the life of the shaped countries, our minds were blown globes like the world, and within the worlds of our minds there was created, mapped, and carried there our idea of world and of history. Although we were of little charity, and our hearts like a creator pumped all the creation, in Marchen and epic and leader of blood, through the corridors of our veins, singing like troubadours and minnesingers, and bards, Iliads and Eddas, Odysseys and Genesees, and breaking echoes of history and time and the rabbled glory of men and life through ages in the spaces of our mind's universe, and creating everything again. And hearing the blinded girl's song of the world in the hallway, I melted into the world and changed into everything, entered into everything that had ever been created or constructed. Buildings, woods, rivers, pomp, love, history, and everything entered into me, all involved in all. And then to continue on here. But even a river can fall to ruin. You lie so thin and weak and old. And then skipping a little bit ahead. So often like a flight of summer flies that have vanished, were clean smooth as desert of palmettos and muscadines, and oil wells stood up over broken yellow swords, and you were turned out of your path as though you had forgotten all the ways you had ever gone and moved farther onto Riverside. White Fuller's earth mill on one side, gasping the white fogged breath, and on the other, the black towers of riggings, and the scraped and bald desert of yellow-green or black slag, ugly subterranean rocks, and the thick mud flats and sloughs like the slime of decomposition. And then he has these italicized sections. But across the ice-bound bottomlands, over the sleeted sloughs and the rime of the bog, with beak of horn and horned nails, chiming his terrible midnight, stalks the bird whose ghost you are, O river, O my waters. It seems, Charity, that the young ones were always packing their suitcases to come back to you or to leave you again, and the old ones sitting and waiting, taking the young ones back and keeping them as long as they could. They, at their standoffish distance of never belonging there anywhere that broke the old ones' hearts, who never said a broken-hearted word, till they had to stand on the front porch again and watch them, the Fulners and the Barry Bens and the Sue Emmas and the boys, going through the gate to the highway with their suitcase in their hands, away again, who knew where. There was just no future in a little town like you for young people, young and ready, they said. But the old ones sat right there with you, Charity, holding your dying hand, rocking and wailing and listening or counting their secret, futile beads of hope. And yeah, that passage really struck me because my grandma passed away 2 years ago now, the January before COVID really hit in the United States. And that was one of the last times I visited the small town I'm from. And the time before that, the last time I had seen my grandma, doing well, I was actually there to visit my grandpa, who was on his last leg from intestinal cancer. And me and my brother were going to head back because I was in school and work and that sort of thing. And we had seen my grandpa. And then the next morning we were going to take my grandma out to breakfast. And so, we drove over and picked her up, and it had snowed outside. So we were, walking her to the car and opened the door for her, the whole deal. And then we had breakfast at her favorite breakfast place. And then we came back to her house and we just sat and talked for a while. And she just told me all sorts of stories from her, youth. One that I especially cherish is her mom passed away when she was 12. So then she went to California to stay with some family, stay with her aunt. And she told me this story of being in California, and this would have been in 1940, presumably, maybe 41, 42. But anyway, it would have been in Los Angeles in the early 1940s is when she went there. And her uncle took her up to San Francisco. And he took her on the Golden Gate Bridge. So this is like 1940, 41, 42. And they drove across the Golden Gate Bridge. And at that time, Alcatraz was still populated by criminals. It was still a functioning prison. And she told me that she remembers looking out over the bay and seeing Alcatraz in the distance. Her uncle had slowed down on this bridge. And she was so frightened that one of the prisoners had broken out and could get to her that she almost couldn't look at Alcatraz, knowing that it was, this right there, she could see it. And she also had stories of, being in Los Angeles in the early 1940s, that sometimes she would go to these theaters, either movie theaters or, regular theater productions, and she would sit next to these actors that just lived there and would go too. So, she told us these stories, and then, we went back, and then unfortunately that was the last time I saw her healthy. And, but anyway, going, the way he describes the small town, the young people leaving, my family left the small town when I was young. I left when I was 7. I only had ever visited after that, moving to progressively bigger and bigger towns. And, I do think that's an especially American thing, the life and death of a small town. And in that same way, the people who are in it, the older people who stay, the young people who leave, and might come back and visit, but never really have a home in that sense. And then just have one last passage I want to read, and it kind of gives you an idea of another one of the characters. And this is from her voice. And this is on page 78. Oh, the sweet breath of the woods, the baby breath fern and the little woods violets and the daylilies. And on Rob's Hill, rising up beyond the old river bridge, there'd be fire on the mountain, blazing like the burning bushes of Moses. There's a new steel bridge now, and the old one is broken and sway-backed. The one I'd never ride over was condemned, and would take them, let me get out and walk across. Then we'd go for our rides out on the highway. Remember those summer Sundays we had our picnics there, and all'd go wading in the water and look for good sweet gum and hickory sticks. And some would be fishing with sugarcane poles, and others would be rustling through the dry palmettos like field mice, or strolling under the shining longleaf pines and the blackjack pines. And through it all, the sweet little Charity River flowing lazy and small and clear as a tear. Instead of all this decoration of the woods, you know what's there now? Oil wells there now. Thicker and flies. All along there, and all the tree frogs and whippoorwills are flown away. Can't live near an oil derrick. No nature left. No wonder. So, I can't really do the accent, of course, but you can, even through my voice, you can still hear the dialect in it, and you know, you can feel there the tragedy of it still too. So, you know, I fell in love with the book. It's definitely one of my favorite books. You know, it fits in that tradition of, you know, Suttree by McCarthy. It fits in the tradition of something like Ulysses by James Joyce, In Search of Lost Time by Proust, some of my favorite books. And this is another book I would put in the category of late modernism. And so, as I usually do, I went digging. I found this book that I loved, and I went digging. So I looked online for information about him, and I was pleased to find that he had a Paris Review interview from 1976, which marked the 25th anniversary reprint of the book. So I am going to share part of that interview with you that I found. So here is a section from the Paris Review interview, which is from 1976. So William Goyen would be, you know, 50, 60 years old now. And the interviewer is just asking him, you know, oh, what sort of writers influenced you? Americans, Europeans, that sort of thing. So here's the interviewer. What European authors and American have meant the most to you? This is Goyen. Hawthorne and Melville and Henry James, and two poets, Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, have influenced me. Interviewer. They seem odd choices for a Southwestern fiction writer. And then here's Goyen. I still read, still study the cantos of Pound. I found Pound in Texas when I was 18 or 19 through a young friend named William Hart. Hart was one of those prodigies, enfants terribles, that materialize in small towns, young men bearing a sense of art and poetry and life as naturally as others bore the instinct to compete and to copulate. He had a great deal to do with my early enlightenment and spiritual salvation in a lower middle class environment in an isolated, then, Texas town, where a boy's father considered him a sissy if he played the piano, and as I've said, and questioned the sexual orientation of any youth who read poetry. William Hart was a true pioneer. He brought me Pound, Eliot, and Auden. He was self-taught, finding things for himself out of hunger. He had a high school education, barely, but afterwards he came and sat in my classes at Rice and listened. He knew more than the professors did sometimes. He really did. About Elizabethan drama and medieval romances, he knew these things. He was a delicate boy, obviously, but not effete. He was French Cajun from a poor family, and he was on the streets, and could have been in trouble a lot. But he ended up in the library. They felt they had a revolutionary in there. In the Houston Public Library at 19, he would get up and speak about literature, Archibald MacLeish of all people. And oh, how this man Hart spoke. The whole library would turn and listen. He became that kind of town creature, one of those who go down in cities unheralded. They go down into beds of ashes. Well, he brought me to Pound. So, you know, I was fascinated by this description of William Hart. You know, this guy that really got him into the literature that influenced him most. And then, of course, influenced him writing House of Breath. So then, after reading that, I fell down the rabbit hole. I got two books that were about William Goyen, One is the biography, It Starts with Trouble, William Goyen and the Life of Writing by Clark Davis. That's published by University of Texas Press. And I got Selected Letters from a Writer's Life, of course about William Goyen, also published by University of Texas Press, with an afterword by Stephen Spender. So I will read a couple letters between William Goyen and William Hart. So as you can see, I'm stepping up my production value. I've spliced two different times of recording together. Quite fancy, I'm impressed. So yeah, these are going to be a series of letters. So as I got into it, I started reading his letters, and the first letter is to William Hart, Houston, Texas, Wednesday afternoon, March 3rd, 1937. But that's not the one I want to focus on. I want to focus on one, page 16, and this was written from the USS Casablanca, September 14th, 1943, to William Hart. And he starts it out. My dear Billy, so much to say, so little time, and our letters are so few these days. I am working very hard and under a terrific strain, and what I want to say cannot be written. I am no longer a letter writer, if I ever was one. And then continuing on, he says, I have a thing in my head to write. I have words, many of which I have thrown down on paper, like a wrestler his opponent, which I want to use. But God, how this ship imprisons the mind. I have seen some exquisite places, clouds, waters, mountains, and it is very cold where I have been. I have forgotten summer. My future is dreadfully uncertain. I cannot say where I shall go or what I shall be doing. But you must write. I am simply speechless. And anyway, you know what I am feeling and trying to do. Take care, Billy, and write. Love to you, Billy. And the thing that I want to point out is, and it is very cold where I have been. And of course, this thing he's wanting to write is The House of Breath. And he mentioned how he got that title, The House of Breath. He was sitting on the USS Casablanca on his ship, you know, in the bunks. And as he would breathe out, he would see this plume of, vapor, this moisture from his breath. And as he would breathe out, he would be thinking about his hometown and his family. And in so many words, that's how he started The House of Breath. And that's what, he had in him to write. Now, I want to skip ahead a few years to the time when he's basically written the book, The House of Breath. Let me find the page. All right, right here. So this is on page 127, and this is to William Hart, and it is January 31st, 1949. My dearest Billy, thank you so much for your wonderful letter. I cannot read it again, for it terrifies me so that I am believed in, that the faith of those few who have always had faith continues. Lately I have had the most tortured and agonized time of my life. It is bound up with this work. It seems I am compelled to go over it again, very carefully, all my life up to now. And now I know that this book is only a reduplication of my life. For this reason, it is an exceedingly dangerous book. But once it is finished, regardless of what happens to it, it will be there, and then I can go on. The title of the book is The House of Breath. So that's where he gives the title. I am in constant correspondence with an editor at Random House who is extremely intelligent and of enormous help and stimulation. It is refreshing to know that one can communicate with editors of publishing houses directly, and that these men are men of integrity and great sympathy. I believe something will come of my relations with Random House, and if, in the end, the book is not published, it will be because I have chosen against it. But oh, Billy, everything is in it. It is all there. and it has been written in the midst of great suffering, greater than any of you know. This does not mean that it is a great book, only that it is the best and most honest and most compelling work I could do now. I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for your marvelous letter. We are in a tradition, you and I, and often I think that despite my few beautiful friends in the world, Walter and Frida and Stephen, the book is written for you, and only you can really know the roots and the blossoms of all that I shall ever do, successful or not. We are in a destiny, you and I, and now we see that probably our lives have been conditioned by all that went on between us so long ago, all that was so dark and difficult and chaotic and absurd. And there is a note. He says that this book is written for you, and only you can really know the roots. But, in fact, Goyen did dedicate it for Frida and Walter. So Frida is Frida Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence's wife. At this point, D.H. Lawrence had passed away. So this was in Taos, New Mexico, when Goyen got out of the military after World War II ended. He had a friend, Walter, and he got connected with this artist colony in Taos. And Stephen is Stephen Spender, the person who wrote the Afterword, the British author. So he knew quite a lot of people pretty early on. But I think it's fascinating that, he says this book is written for you. And then I have one more letter I want to show you. And this is the really, really interesting part. Okay. So this is skipping ahead about a year. To William Hart. And he's writing from New York City, July 10th, 1950. My dearest Billy, thank you for your lovely letter. I send a reply tonight before beloved Walter arrives in the morning at 8 a.m. in Hoboken. I shall rise at 7 to get there to see his incredible ship touch this island. How right that we two should meet again on a dock and one of us coming over the water to the other. Our whole life together has been watery. We met upon water, loved and suffered there, parted at a dock in Honolulu, again at a dock in Southampton, England. Now I meet him at the edge of water, with a bottle of bourbon and the house of breath in my hands. And who standing on that dock will know what a life is rejoining there, what lives embraces what lives tomorrow. My God, our lives, all our lives, are legend, and one sees himself living out a legend. Watches it like a story read aloud or told by some friend, disembodied narrator. Over and over we find each other on the shore and lose each other there. I am haunted by glaucus and the bitter weed. Say this for me if ever I go before you do, and Walter too, for only you two know it. And then he talks a little bit about his time in New York, where he meets Alice Astor, and he talks about the voices of Granny and Mally and of Charity, who are the characters in House of Breath. And he says he's been invited to these, social places because they've heard that he's written down a book that might be something. And I want to skip ahead a little bit. The truth, dear Billy, is that I have put my life's truth down, done it in isolation from the world, in vision and near madness and sickness. I have, and no one really knows this but I, brought myself up from the well into light and among the voices, and here I am. Now I am in my time and in the world, and I must serve these and be of those. Find them out, clarify them, and speak of them. Oh, they are all coming by to see what I am. The young ones are bringing their manuscripts of poems and stories. They call on the telephone, send me letters, and knock on my door. I let them all in. I give them a good look. Some kind of bandwagon, they don't know just what, is passing by, and they all want to get on. There are interviews, there are radio programs, even television. There are huge parties where the editors of magazines come to shake my hand and to introduce me around. I say all this to you because it is a kind of recording of it, as though I were writing it in my notebook. But I ask myself, where is the house of breath? How strange it all is, how dangerously strange. Random House apparently will not pay my transportation home in August. They rather scorn my being in Texas after publication. I may not be able to afford the trip, yet do not commit me either way. We'll see. Anyway, I am working out the play, and I am thinking hard on the novel, which I can see quite clearly now. But who knows when these things will be ready? Years, perhaps. Sit with your ghost, dearest Billy. He will treat you right. Some flesh just wants to be ghost, that's all, and ghosts have their worth and meaning. Remember, as you sit, that I'm sitting too, dear one. And so we are setting together in our rooms or in crowds, inviting ghosts to have us ghostly if we can't be had fleshly, for we are both. Remember, I love you, setting there. And that ghosts may be the longest lasting, and that no one can take from us the right to go mad. I love you, Billy. And the note mentions that he was thinking about the themes of his next work, which was titled Ghost and Flesh. But the part I wanted to highlight out of this letter is that after this book was published this summer of 1950, he was going to go home to see, presumably family and to see William Hart. Well, he did go back to see William Hart. And I know that because I have the copy of The House of Breath that he gave to Billy in 1950. So I was able to find this, and I was really just overjoyed, and I'll talk about why in a second. But as you see here is the inscription: Beloved Billy, here in this world we have shared, no, sorry, I said that wrong. Beloved Billy, here is this world we have shared, given back. Take it with my eternal love, Billy, August of 1950. And that is William Goyen's handwriting to his friend William Hart. Let me hold it better. And I bought this from a bookseller in San Francisco. Well, I ordered it online, but the guy was in San Francisco. And now, with all this being said, of course, I think you can see why this is particularly amazing. This whole scope of a life and this unknown person, William Hart. I couldn't really find out a whole lot about him. Apparently his materials are held at Rice. Haven't had a chance to go over there, but I couldn't really find him out. His letters continue to Goyen till 1973 or 76, I can't remember. But if you look him on Google, you find a couple people with that name, but none really fit the birth dates. So, this figure was brought to life again through William Goyen, and part of the reason why this amazed me so much is because I have a friend named Jacob that the relationship between Goyen and William Hart really struck me like being very similar to our friendship. We met, I don't even know how many years ago now, probably when I first heard of House of Breath, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. And we were both, just obsessed with writing and art and all sorts of things. And in a similar way to how Goyen and William Hart talk about each other, they, just constantly gave recommendations to each other, were constantly writing to each other, sharing the work, and that's the relationship I have with my friend Jacob. And I can only imagine how many artists in the past, whether, literary artists or physical artists, sculptors, painters, poets, musicians must have had similar friendships. William Gaddis had a friendship with a guy named Martin Dworkin. And supposedly they would have, just hour-long discussions at night when Gaddis was writing the recognitions. And apparently, the story goes that Gaddis would write down verbatim many of their conversations, and they found them. They found their way into the recognitions. And it's just funny because me and my friend do that. Me and my friend Jacob do that. So it really means a lot to me. And although William Goyen currently is not a very popular author, I do think this book is due for a revival. Now, I partially say that because I think it's excellent and beautiful, and it has everything you'd want in an excellent book. But also, other people who have excellent taste really liked it. So I've already mentioned, Frida Lawrence, Stephen Spender, Elizabeth Bowen, Catherine Ann Porter. But it was translated into German by, you might recognize his name, Ernst Robert Curtius, the famous medieval Latin and European literature scholar, Romance language scholar, similar to Erich Auerbach, who had translated The Wasteland into German. He translated The House of Breath into German and said its stature is comparable to The Wasteland. It's impossible to compare works that are, the level of The Wasteland, but at the very least, someone with his critical faculties gave the check to The House of Breath, and I would say it's excellent. Like I said, my friend Echo reminded me of, reminded me of it, got me to read it. I read it once through, just loved it, and then in preparation for talking about it, I read it again once more through, and yeah, it holds up. Hopefully this video will get more people interested in it. There were several reprintings. If you do want the original hardcover, it can be a little difficult to find depending on when you look. But there was like I said, a 25th anniversary reprinting in 1976, and then there was another reprinting in the 2000s. I can't remember exactly when, but I think it's currently in print, and if not, it's widely available in the paperback edition. I will say though, if you want to get the real book, get the hardcover, because, well, let me think about this. So get the hardcover or get the newest printing, because for the 1976 printing, he took out some material that has to do with some of the more erotic themes of the book, which I think is a shame, and I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, they were restored in the newest edition, but they were taken out of the 1976 printing. So just keep that in mind if you're interested in reading the actual real stuff. It's nothing crazy, but some of the metaphors he does use do play with like, I would say almost, a classical eroticism. It's nothing, it's no craziness from, France or anything like that, but, the French, we're a bunch of weirdos, but anyway, so all this to say, I highly recommend this book. Get a hold of it, read it, share it. Let's get this book more widely known. And this author, he does have, I think, 5 other novels, a couple collections of short stories. His last novel is pretty fascinating, Arcadio, about a Spanglish transgender. If I had to put it in 2 words, pretty fascinating. But anyway, so just wanted to bookend this with another thank you to people who support my Patreon and anyone who watches these videos. And always remember, you can't forget, death is a gang boss.